Hey there, folks. Welcome to today's episode of the SME Strategy Podcast. One of the things we really aim to do is to interview people that have been there, done that, lived it, and really like doing it earnest because you don't need to hear from a consultant, even though I'm kind of quasi a consultant. You want to hear from somebody that's lived it. And so today, my guest, Cameron Bishop, he's the managing director at Raincatcher. It's a very interesting, cool career, hyper growth companies before hyper growth was a word. I'm just really excited to chat with him about his experience, what he's learned, what he sees businesses doing as they transition out. So obviously the life cycle of a business. Calling from Kansas. Cameron, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks. It's a Friday afternoon. It's sun's out. The weather's beautiful here. All
It's
good.
it's one of those great days that as an entrepreneur, like you really take advantage of. And I know everybody here isn't an entrepreneur, but who knows? You might be catching this, Friday afternoon with a bit of sun and some ice cream and popcorn or whatever makes you happy. Cam, I gave our audience a little bit about who you are. How do you describe yourself as a manager and a leader? Do you have like an ethos you think about, or you just go in there and get her done? Like, what is your approach to leadership?
Yeah, Anthony, I'm a huge believer in the concept of servant leadership. And, one of my favorite things when I was interviewing senior managers to work with me in any of the companies I worked in, one of the last questions I would ask them if I was really serious about hiring them was, will you be afraid to disagree with me?
Hmm.
And, that sets some people back some. And, you're working with sharp people. And I said, no, I won't. And I said, that's good because I don't get it right all the time myself. And the key for us is to get it right. So if you're not willing to push back, you have unique skills that I don't have. We're better as a team if we work that way. So the key for me was always to ask questions and listen. I told him I'm not always going to agree with you, but oftentimes I'll pivot based on the information you could give me because it's a different perspective than what I see.
Yeah, I love that because, in the companies that you've worked with, you had hundreds, if not thousands of employees. And, before we start thinking about how do you do that at scale, how do you do that in your locus of control? And of course, that's not the key part of, running a business, growing, exiting successfully, which is, part of your work. But it's like one of those things that, in my opinion, holds back a team. Like just I made a video about it yesterday saying, if you can't have that trust, there's no way you can have high performance and growing at the speed that you scaled your organizations. How did you foster that? Well, how did you foster it with your leadership team first? And then how do you scale that out so you can like take advantage of so many opportunities?
Yeah, I think part of it is being smart enough yet humble enough to know what you don't know and find experts to do that for you. And again, if you surround yourself with experts as your senior team, I don't care if it's your CFO, your CMO, your CTO, those folks are specialists in their area, and you need to rely on their skill set and you need to listen to them. But under servant leadership, as the CEO or president, you sort of set the goal and the direction you're going, and you get direction and input from your team for that. But then once you have that, you say, what do you need to get that job done? And then that's where you come in as a servant leader. Your role is to support them in order to execute on what the company needs to achieve in total.
Absolutely. So let me ask, given that you have and for those of you listening on audio, Cam is just over 30. Okay. So if you're watching our
Only in
video,
my dreams,
yeah.
Anthony. Only in my dreams.
So you've led companies through a lot of economic times, certainly like time periods of the company, time periods of economic growth and probably less than growth. How if you can take us back, what was a big major challenge that you faced in one of your organizations and how did you come through it? Any specifics that you're willing to share? Something that you're proud of, like moving the company through, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, first I'll share. I was extremely fortunate to work for an absolutely brilliant man who was the chairman of the parent company that owned us in New York. The company I ran was originally owned by Macmillan Book Publishing, which I believe was a Fortune 100 company, and the chairman and some other senior officers left and formed a partnership with the huge private equity firm Coldwell Kravitz Roberts and started a new firm. And they then acquired the company that I was with. So I continued to work for him. And that was a pure stroke of luck. Sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. And one of his favorite expressions was, anybody can manage in good times, but it takes a real dedicated and effective manager to manage through the tough times. And clearly, with economic cycles being what they are and working for him as long as I did, we went through several down cycles in the process. And yeah, it's more of a challenging factor, but you work with the situation you're given at that point in time, and you figure out how to adapt. And again, if you could leverage the talent of your team, sometimes it takes a village, and you can rise above many of those downside challenges that you face.
Anything specific that you're like, hey, I was, when we had to deal with this, obviously without, breaking any confidentialities, but my assertion is that, as where the market is now, there's both good and bad times, and folks are having to make those decisions. Any kind of pearls of wisdom from what you experienced?
Yeah, I did. This is in more recent times. I was hired on a contract to do a very complex turnaround on a $60 million 501(c)(3) organization that had been in consistent and increasingly steep decline for a number of years. And I was brought in to kind of change the corporate culture and do a technology, literally transformation on the business because everything they were doing was quite antiquated.
Mhm.
The corporate culture was highly insular in that organization when I came on board, with major resistance from many factions in the company because I represented significant change. Uh, to sort of begin to understand how deep and ingrained the culture was, I employed a tactic that I learned back in my days when we were doing leverage roll-ups and we were buying 3 to 5 companies at a time. And we would take all of the key employees, and and I did this in this turnaround situation, and I would meet with them privately for, 15, 20 minutes each, so that these individuals had an opportunity to be heard. And the questions I would ask them in that conversation was, hey, tell me first what you want to make sure the company continues to do. Because the last thing in the world I wanted to do was screw up something that was highly valued by all the employees.
Mhm.
Then tell me something you would really like to see the company start doing. And, employees could oftentimes be very insightful and they see opportunities and no one ever asks them. So those never come out. So it fosters a lot of potential for really good ideas, new products, new avenues, new methodologies. And then the last question you ask is, what would you like to see the company stop doing?
Mhm.
Well, actually, by the time you get to the negative, you already know the answer to that because it usually comes out as the positive in terms of what they would like to see the company start doing. And I have found that over the time to be an absolutely invaluable practice because employees feel heard, they feel important, and they have really good ideas.
Yeah.
And in that particular situation, some of the assumptions I had made going into it, as it turned out, were flat wrong and would have been critical mistakes if I had not learned what I had learned from employees in the company. Uh, but I've just found that to be an extremely invaluable tactic to use in any integration setting. And even long established companies, it's a great tool to have in your management toolkit.
Yeah, I love that. So stop, start, continue, which you could do at any time. You getting all of those things with all of those people. And what I think is interesting when you talked about like you started with the servant leadership as a piece. You're undertaking this big change in this case as a contractor. But if you're doing 5 roll-ups and folks, I've been in meetings I lead meetings with senior leaders and there's 10, 15 of them. Imagine having 5 different groups of those all at a time. Well, we see that too. But the fact is, it's so many human beings to manage. It's so many different vantages, and you have to kind of like stay the course in terms of what you're trying to accomplish, whether that's alignment or buy-in, or I mean, it is everything that you said, Cam. You need to have that buy-in. If you don't have the buy-in, you do one of your ideas that you thought, hey, I'm smarter than everybody, I'm going to roll this out. Well, you lose the buy-in of those folks, and it's a bad idea to boot. And so by talking to those folks, by being curious about them, by recognizing what's important to them, it sounds like you were able to get validation or invalidation of your own ideas, get them bought into you as a person who's driving this forward, and then kind of having a shared commitment for, hey, we want to drive these most important things forward because that's what's going to get us to success. And then, through that process, I'm sure you realize that there were other folks who maybe didn't have the whole plot in those conversations either.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think central to that process on an ongoing basis is I don't believe as a senior manager you can communicate too much
Mm.
with your team at any level. And if you're going through a transformational process, where there's a lack of information, the void gets filled by speculation and rumors. And once those have started, they're almost impossible to put out. So over communication is critical to the transformation process, and the same on the integration process when you're acquiring businesses. So over my career, I acquired about 50 companies, and every one of those had to be integrated. And the start, stop, keep methodology was key to effective integration because we wanted to identify what the most valuable cultural characteristics of the company we were acquiring was, and made sure we found ways to respect and preserve those factors. One simple example, we bought a company in Berkeley, California, which is most folks would agree is a fairly liberally minded area. And this was a business that had a lot of artistic people in it. And one of the things that they were almost rabid about is that they wanted to make certain that they had Martin Luther King as a day off. And that was we had a flexible holiday schedule so that anybody who wanted to take a day like that off certainly could across a 2,000 employee workforce. But in their case, that was such a critical thing for them that we made an exception. And we established that as a formal day off for that particular organization. And that meant everything to those folks because we respected what they thought was most valuable in that case, even though it was an exception to our typical rule.
Yeah, well, I love that. I just keep thinking of, especially in an organization of 2,000 people, and it can, we're not talking 10, 20, 30. It's, really doing this is recognizing how to mobilize. It's really mobilizing people, just making sure like, hey, you're moving everyone towards that place and just being really in tune with it. And then I can't help think of like I look at the painting behind you, and like part of it I visualize like transformation, but then I also visualize like as you talk about, communication is that you can't over communicate because that's the calm in the organization. And I see, the ones that maybe don't make that successful transformation or the things that lead to those declines is potentially when you have those gaps of communication, gaps of honesty, and then they end up living in that chaos versus being comfortable in the chaos. Is that kind of fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. It sure is.
Because like when you're integrating and you're working with different teams, it's not necessarily chaos. It's just delicate, maybe.
Yeah.
How do you see the nature of leadership teams like kind of storming together, and then not necessarily how do you fix it because of not nature is a problem, but you've seen it so many times. What does a delicate leadership team look like in your experience?
Yeah. Well, in general, I believe that the CEO or the president, they really set the tone for how the rest of the management team is going to practice their management style. And I've always felt that it's very important not to hire people in my image, but to hire people with contrasting points of view and styles so that we create complementary skills rather than having me too people with everybody echoing the same thing that I would echo. Again, it goes back to I always wanted to be the dumbest person in the room. If I could hire really smart people, that had a different approach or how they saw the world, we were going to be a better company for that because it was going to create diversity of thought, of backgrounds, and of styles. But overall, the tone is set by the senior executive in the organization, and everybody tends to follow that lead over time.
Yeah.
And that's where mentoring management can also be valuable if you got a manager who's sort of, maybe ruffling too many feathers that Sometimes that's appropriate, sometimes it's not. And if it's an assessment that it's not, then that's when some mentoring can usually help to kind of smooth some of those management or personality styles in the process.
Yeah, I hear the heart of it is building a team and having that complementary point of view. And they said, oh yeah, that's really good, solid MBA skills. It's like, yeah, that's what a journalism degree will get you curious to actually think about other perspectives other than yourself. So I think that's really cool. I think you have a journaling degree or
Yeah,
journalism degree.
exactly.
So let's talk about the business has been successful. They're looking at exiting. I presume that your job is easier when you work with integritous, good leaders because, well, those companies are just more profitable. What in terms of Raincatcher, what are you seeing there in the marketplace? What would you want your, let's call it, future clients to consider to think about as they move forward into the next kind of couple of years of their working life?
Man, Anthony, thanks for teeing that up with me for me. This is a true personal passion for me, and why I really appreciate being allowed to participate in podcasts like yours, so that I can kind of share the message for my passion. So the background for that is, in acquiring 50 some odd companies over the many years, I saw so many cases where business owners did not know how to properly position and prepare their company for sale. And they ultimately left a lot of money on the table that they otherwise could have been paid if they were properly structured in order to be sold. And of course, as the buyer for those businesses, it wasn't my job to tell them what they should be doing so I could pay more for the business. But it's really kind of sad, especially if it was an entrepreneurial business owner, as opposed to buying a division or a product from a major company. That's a little different scenario. But for entrepreneurial owners, in most cases, their business, his or her business, is their single greatest source of potential generational wealth. And if your company is worth $3 billion, but if you positioned it properly, maybe you get 4 million. That's a pretty profound difference in how a company can achieve a maximum valuation. And in my role as one of the partners and managing directors with Raincatcher, oftentimes it's almost tragic. We see these cases where these business owners come to us and say, hey, I want to sell my company. And there are a myriad number of reasons why they're either A, are simply not sellable at all, or if they're going to sell, they're going to sell at a substantial discount to the valuation they could achieve if they had properly planned ahead in order for that to happen. And the trends are such that, I think the common statistic is something like 10,000 baby boomers turn age 65 every single day. So a lot of the entrepreneurial or family-owned businesses the owners are literally aging out. And it's a well-known phenomenon that in the vast majority of cases, their children don't want anything to do with their parents' companies. So if they're going to extract the value out of that business for their generational wealth, retirement, planning for their economic certainty for their children and their grandchildren, they're left without an option other than to sell the company. And I think I've seen it in Forbes magazine, and the Pepperdine School of Business cites statistics that somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 to 80% of businesses that try to sell never sell. And that's part of my message, is to offer some real thought for business owners and encourage them to think about their business in a different way than they normally do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. I mean, one of my potential questions was, what kind of business do you need to have for somebody to invest $150 million into you? So like I could have asked Cam that and he would have had a good answer. But I think, kind of going back to what, you were sharing, Cam, is that, the same principle applies. You just have to be thinking about it in a different context. Like you need to be thinking not today in 2025, especially given all of the stuff. But if you're like, as entrepreneurs, you only have so many hills you can go over until you're like, I'm good. Not just over the hill. Anyways, as you think, you're like, your exit strategy is 2028, 2029, 2030, baby. Like it's not a year from now, it takes a time to do all that work, and you could gotta build it. So if you're listening now and you're building a good business and you do want to do it fast, consider aligning your organization, considering making those changes. I mean, Cam is the person to talk to you about that. I'm also going to bet, and you didn't tell me this, that you have the rain maker and then you're trying to do the rain catching so that rain
That's
doesn't go
exactly
away.
right.
I
Yes.
got that. Yeah. So, I
Yep.
mean, it happens faster than you think. And I get to talk to hundreds of people and in boardrooms about this. Get your shit together. If you are in one of those businesses, there's potentially, 10, $100 million on the table, depending on what kind of business you're in. And even if it's just a million, 2 million, not that that's pocket change, getting that organized, it's an exponential value for you and your family and your future and your legacy. So, Cam, I'm pretty sure most of that is correct. Anything you want to deny? And then where can people connect with you, learn more about you and your work and who you are as a human?
Yeah, you can reach me, Cameron.bishop@raincatcher.com. You can go to www.raincatcher.com, or you can find me easily on LinkedIn. Happy to talk to anybody and offer any other thoughts or advice. But my one key takeaway for these business owners is, most business owners spend 95% or more of their time working in the business and 5% or less of their time working on the business. And if there's an exit visible in their future, they need to kind of flip that model and really begin to focus on creating exit value rather than, generating income distributions and avoiding paying taxes, which is the normal day-to-day business course for business owners.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, you don't need to wait until you're thinking of selling your business to make these changes. So if you are looking at aligning your team, getting more effective strategically, whether or not you're selling, and of course, if you're selling, you talk to Cam. If you're not, you can talk to both of us. It's just good business. So speaking of good business, thank you, Cam, for sharing with us today. It has been such a blast, such a privilege. Thanks for being so generous with your expertise. I hope people take advantage of connecting with you. And just thanks for being on the show today.
Hey, great. It's been a pleasure to be here. I appreciate it very much, Anthony. Thank you.
Pleasure's all mine. Folks, thanks for watching our episode of the SME Strategy Podcast. My guest today, Cameron Bishop, Managing Director at Raincatcher. Connect with him and really do think about it. It's not just working in the business, it's working on the business. The opportunity, if and when you sell, even if it's 5, 10, 20 years from now, that transitional changes, transformational changes that are happening in the market, in the business world, this is where you can make your money in your business because you have a little bit more latitude to make these transformational changes. So if you want to talk more about that, be sure to connect with us, SMEstrategy.net. Thanks for being here. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for liking. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for doing all of the stuff. I appreciate you, and I'll catch you next time.